Hi, my name is Morgan and I am a neuroscience researcher, and as you might be able to tell by the title of today's video and by my wonderful mask here, today we're going to be talking about coronavirus, aka SARS-CoV-2, aka COVID-19, or whatever else you feel like calling it. Now, before I even get started, I just want to put this PSA out there. Please, 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 please wear a mask. It helps all of us. It helps protect everyone from you, as you are potentially a carrier. A lot of people are asymptomatic, or you don't have symptoms for the first 2 weeks and you're still contagious, and so you could still get the rest of us sick. So you need to wear a mask. We all need to be wearing masks. The more that everyone wears a mask, the less time that we're going to have to wear them for. The reason why we've had to wear them for so long and had to stay in quarantine for so long is because not everyone is wearing a mask. So if everyone will wear a mask and social distance properly, we won't have to do this for as long. So please, 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 please wear a mask. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So I wanted to talk about coronavirus and how it affects your brain for two main reasons. The first reason is that I haven't seen a lot of reputable people on YouTube talking about coronavirus lately, and I think the reason for that is that YouTube is demonetizing everyone who talks about coronavirus, which they did in order to prevent the spread of misinformation, but I think what they didn't realize is that the people spreading the misinformation care a lot less about being monetized than the people who are spreading the correct information. Either way though, this channel is not monetized, so I don't have to worry about that, and I can say whatever I want. Luckily for you, I use sources and science and research to make my statements. So the sources for everything that I say will be linked in the description box, so you can check them out for yourself. To be totally transparent with you, the other reason why I really want to talk about this is because I've already had to read some of these articles for class, and I thought it was interesting, but also it's kind of easy to talk about because I've already done most of the research. So like I said, everything that I say is going to be supported by sources that I will link in the description box below. Most of what I say is going to be coming from an article by Johns Hopkins University, the CDC, and also 3 different research articles that I've read. So first of all, let's do some basic background information on what coronavirus is. It is the current pandemic that we are dealing with. It is also known as SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. So coronaviruses aren't really anything new. We've had coronaviruses for a very long time. They typically cause mild symptoms similar to the common cold, but what we're dealing with now is different and obviously severe enough to cause a worldwide shutdown for a little bit, and it's very serious. COVID-19 was first identified in Wuhan, China in late 2019, hence the 19 at the end of the name, unlike what some people have tried to assert is not the 19th coronavirus. It was discovered in 2019. Some symptoms to look out for with coronavirus are fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, or nausea or vomiting. A lot of these symptoms sound very similar to the flu, and we are entering into flu season, but if you suspect that you might have coronavirus, please go and get tested. One of the main differences between the two of them is that loss of taste or smell, so if you have that, it's probably coronavirus. Please go get taken care of, or quarantine yourself. Some complications that have arisen from COVID-19 include pneumonia, respiratory failure, sepsis, heart attacks and strokes, multiple organ failure, inflammation of the heart, brain, or muscle tissue, and excessive clotting in the lungs, heart, legs, or brain. And this is what some people have been talking about lately. There's been a recent report of a lot of COVID deaths not actually being due to coronavirus, and what that actually has meant is that a lot of COVID deaths were not listed as purely COVID deaths. Some of them were listed as pneumonia or respiratory failure or stroke or heart attack, but all of those were caused by coronavirus. The person would not have had a stroke or heart attack had they not had coronavirus. So yes, 100% of coronavirus deaths are still due to coronavirus, just sometimes they have other things happening on top of that that were caused by coronavirus. So how do we prevent the spread of COVID-19? It is extremely easy if just everyone would do it. Number 1, wash your hands. I don't know why that has been so difficult throughout this pandemic. Just wash your hands. Please, we should all be doing that all the time anyways, but especially in the middle of a pandemic. Number 2, wear a mask whenever you go out in public. Please. 3, please social distance as much as possible. Please don't go out unless you have to go out. And don't hold large gatherings. Something that Canada is doing that I think is a great idea is having everyone decide like a group of people that they are able to be around. For instance, if you gather with your family often, then make sure that your family is also quarantining. And if both of you have been quarantining and you can get together every once in a while, that should be safe. But if, say, you are quarantining and your family is not, and you get together with them, that is not safe. Or if you live nowhere near your family and you'd like to be able to get together with your friends, have a group of friends who have all been quarantining separately and only gather in that group of friends. In addition to my sources, I will also be linking the CDC's frequently asked questions down below so you can read up more on how to protect yourself and what to do if you get coronavirus. So COVID-19 has been labeled as mostly a respiratory disease, meaning that has mostly to do with your lungs. So why in the world am I here as a neuroscientist to talk about your brain when this is a disease that affects your lungs? The more that we look into it and the more patients that we're able to study, it does seem that COVID-19 has some cognitive effects, meaning that it is affecting people's brains. And so we're not totally sure how that is happening just yet, but I'll get into a few of the theories in a little bit. But just so you know, some of the cognitive symptoms that people with COVID-19 have been experiencing include confusion, loss of consciousness, seizures, stroke, loss of taste and smell, headaches, trouble focusing, or changes in behavior. I've even read a few stories of people experiencing psychosis and hallucinations while having COVID-19. So this is a pretty serious disease whenever it comes to the respiratory things, but whenever it comes to the brain as well. So like I said, COVID-19 is relatively new, and so there's not a whole lot of research on it, and we haven't been able to figure out exactly how it's affecting the brain, but we do have a few different theories. The first theory is that COVID-19 is actually making its way into the brains of patients. This is supported by a few cases in China, Japan, and also Florida, where the virus has actually been found in cerebrospinal fluid, which is the fluid in your brain, and also it's been found in some brain cells. A virus making its way all the way to the brain is relatively rare because your brain has a structure called the blood-brain barrier, which is a series of blood vessels that prevents viruses and bacteria from making their way to your brain. So there are, of course, obviously different viruses and bacteria that have been able to make it past the blood-brain barrier, but typically that does prevent most of them from reaching the brain. So this would be a really interesting discovery. Scientists who support this theory think that maybe the virus is entering through the nose and going through the olfactory bulb, and they're saying that patients losing their sense of smell and taste is a sign of COVID-19 entering through their nose, because the olfactory bulb, which is the part of your brain that processes smell, is located directly above your nose. A different theory is that the immune system is just going into overdrive and it's causing a lot of inflammation. So something that's seen a lot in maybe small children is that whenever they get a fever, their fever will go a little bit too high because their body hasn't really figured out how high it can go to kill bacteria and viruses versus how high it can go to kill itself. So the theory is that your immune system is trying so hard to fight the virus that's causing a lot of inflammation, and this inflammation can lead to inflammation in the brain, and whenever your brain gets inflamed, that is not great for it. Next is the theory that your body is just in total chaos. There's so much going on in your body during COVID-19 that your brain just can't really handle it. For example, the respiratory failure is going to prevent a lot of oxygen from getting to your brain. Heart failure will also prevent a lot of the oxygen from getting to your brain. All of the inflammation will prevent your brain from working properly, and so on. There's just so many symptoms happening that all affect your brain that your brain just sort of starts to shut down. Lastly, there's the theory that COVID-19 is causing a lot of blood clotting, which isn't necessarily a theory. That is a real fact that COVID-19 causes more blood clotting, but blood clotting can lead to a lot of issues. Your blood is able to clot so that if you have a cut or a wound, then you don't automatically bleed out. So like whenever you form a scab, that's blood clotting. Also, your blood can clot inside the vessels. If a vessel maybe gets ruptured for any reason, it can fix that. but sometimes your blood clots too much. And so a blood clot will form sort of like this little bundle inside of your vessels, and for a little bit that won't really matter because it'll form inside of a larger blood vessel, and so it'll just sort of float along down the bloodstream, just being a little bit larger than the rest of the blood cells. But then eventually it'll make its way into smaller blood vessels, and whenever it gets into those smaller blood vessels, it gets stuck, and then that can cause a heart attack, it can cause a stroke, it can cut off circulation to particular parts of your body. So excessive blood clotting is not great, and so this theory is just that all of the blood clotting is leading to a lot of blood clotting in your brain, which is cutting off circulation in different parts of your brain and causing strokes. This is kind of supported by the fact that a lot of patients over 30 are having strokes, and 30 is an extremely young age for people to start having strokes unless they're suffering from any prior conditions. And this is happening in patients who are perfectly healthy aside from having COVID-19, who don't have any family history of stroke. They're just having strokes because of the excessive blood clotting that COVID-19 causes. So those are all of the main ways that COVID-19 is affecting patients who have it. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit also about how COVID-19 is affecting the rest of us as a society, as people who are uninfected, what is happening in our brains and what is happening to us. As you can probably guess from your own personal experience, COVID-19 has increased a lot of stress in people, but it's also causing some other mental health issues. According to one article that I read, in a normal disaster, we typically would watch out for people suffering from PTSD due to the trauma caused by the normal disaster. And by normal, I mean like tornadoes, hurricanes, other natural disasters, and then also warfare. And those are considered normal disasters because they are events that can cause trauma. An illness is not typically considered an event that would cause trauma, especially if it's an illness that isn't happening to you. Now, this isn't to discredit anyone who may be suffering from PTSD due to this. Coronavirus itself, like the actual pandemic, is not likely to lead to PTSD, but the events that coronavirus has caused, such as massive job loss and food and home insecurity, can definitely be considered traumatic events that may cause PTSD. So instead of looking for PTSD, we should now be looking for people who may be suffering from an increase or a sudden onset of depression and anxiety. I'm talking actual legitimate, I am so stressed that I cannot function, I am so stressed that it's causing me some health problems, that sort of anxiety. The people who are most at risk for these mental health issues during a pandemic are, first of all, obviously the people who are most at risk to get the disease because they are the most stressed. So this would be the elderly and also people with compromised immune systems. People who are already suffering from other mental health conditions are also more at risk for this because it may increase their symptoms. And lastly, the healthcare providers are really at risk. This is because of their exposure to the virus, their concern about infecting their loved ones that they may be caring for, the shortages of PPE that we are experiencing, and their longer work hours due to the virus. Also, the quarantine that we have all been in, hopefully you've been quarantining, is still extremely important to quarantine. It's extremely important to social distance, to not go out as much as you used to not get in large gatherings. This is all important to slow the spread, but that doesn't change the fact that it is having some mental health effects, which include an increase in stress, depression, irritability, insomnia, fear, confusion, anger, frustration, and boredom. But I think we could have all guessed that from our own personal experiences. Research has shown that all of those things were likely increased due to the quarantine being indefinite, whenever they kept on saying that it was just going to be 2 more weeks, and then it was longer. So that obviously would increase your stress if you never knew when it was going to end. Also, being confined to one space for long periods of time can obviously be very stressful, especially if, like me, you live in a small apartment, there's not a lot of room to move around, there's not a lot of things to do. That can obviously be very stressful and fear and anxiety inducing. Another thing that might have intensified any mental health conditions would be the differences in stay-at-home orders depending on where you live. I live in the United States, and here I was very different depending on which state you lived in, which could obviously be extremely stressful if, say, you were quarantined, your quarantine was meant to last for 2 months initially, and you saw other states where they were saying 2 weeks. Obviously that would lead to a lot of questions and a lot of fear and anxiety, and like, why in the world is the government doing this to us? If, like, why do we have to be quarantined for 2 months if they have to be quarantined for 2 weeks? Obviously that would cause some mental health issues. In addition to that, and kind of in a similar vein, is the conflicting reports coming from the government versus health officials versus the CDC versus the WHO versus everyone seemed to have conflicting reports in the beginning, and still there are some people who are still trying to perpetuate some of those conflicting reports. But my recommendation would be to listen to the CDC and the WHO. The CDC has made its mistakes in the past, but that is because you are currently watching research happen in real time. I think a lot of people who aren't involved in science don't realize how long science takes and how much is involved in research. And yeah, sometimes researchers get things wrong. But the important thing about the CDC is that they have always admitted when they were wrong, and they're on top of the research. So whatever they are saying is what is currently believed by scientists. So I would listen to the CDC and the World Health Organization. So what are some ways to try to improve your mental health during these #trying times? First of all, the thing that's been recommended since the beginning during all of the quarantines is that you need to try to maintain as much of a routine as possible. Humans do very well whenever we have a routine, and wherever that routine breaks down, we tend to also break down. So just set a normal time for you to wake up in the morning. It doesn't have to be early. If you don't have to get to work until noon, then maybe set an alarm for 10. Wake up just a little bit earlier, get a couple of things done, and just wake up at 10 every morning. Also a regular bedtime, that way you're not staying up until 3 a.m. because you don't have to go to work tomorrow. That would also try to stay active, especially if you have children. Yes, the quarantine means that you probably shouldn't be going to parks, probably shouldn't be going to communal spaces, but that doesn't mean you can't go outside. If you have a yard, you can still go out in the yard. If you live in an apartment complex with like a dog park and you have a dog, take your dog to the dog park. Jog around the block. You can still do all of these things. Just don't interact with other people while doing them, unless you're both wearing a mask or staying 6 feet apart. I've also seen an increase in some home workouts if you want to try to stay active and still stay within your home. If you just look on YouTube, there are a lot of different home workouts for beginners that you can do at home. Another thing that this article really recommended was that if you have children, you need to be having open and honest discussions with them about the pandemic. A lot of people tend to underestimate their child's concerns and fears and stressors because they're children. What do they have to worry about? But going through a worldwide pandemic whenever you're too small to really understand what a pandemic is must be incredibly stressful, and it's important to have these open conversations with your kid to see where they're at, how they're feeling, and exactly what's going on in their mind, and be sure to take those things seriously. Even though we can't gather in real life, it's still important to interact with other humans that you don't live with. So I recommend using Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, whatever video type app that you would like to use to be able to talk to your loved ones and your friends and still have some human interaction. It's also important to maintain a routine of self-care. I know that this pandemic can be extremely stressful, but it's important to still maintain some self-care. That way you don't go insane. So something that I highly recommend is journaling. It's really easy. You just need a piece of paper, or if you have a laptop, you can just open a Word document and just start writing about what's happening, what you're feeling. Other people also do maybe a face mask, maybe a bubble bath, anything that you can do to sort of relax and maybe forget about what's happening for just a small amount of time, just to give yourself a little break from thinking about it. And then lastly, if you are feeling like you have depression or anxiety or any other mental health issues, it is important to seek professional help. I understand that's not possible for everyone, and because of the way that the American healthcare system works, it doesn't really prioritize mental health. But a couple of ways that might be easier for you to get the professional help that you need are, if you look up therapists who work on a sliding scale, that is typically a therapist who will look at what your income is and charge you based on that price. So if you couldn't afford a normal $150 an hour per session therapist, then looking up someone who works on a sliding scale might be beneficial. They might charge you less than that. There's also some apps that I've heard of, like BetterHelp, that you can just text a therapist. I believe they are cheaper than traditional therapy, but I'm not for sure. Also, if you are at a university, typically college campuses will have a therapist, or at least a therapist hotline that you can call, who will either be working at a free or a reduced price. So what is the moral of this whole video talking about coronavirus and how it affects your brain? First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't purely a respiratory illness, that it also affects other parts of your body. It's also important to still be talking about it, because I know, at least here in America, we've gotten kind of bored of coronavirus, which I understand, but that doesn't mean that it's not real and that it's not still happening. But the moral of this whole story is, please wear a mask, please social distance, and please wash your hands. And if you do that, maybe this can all be over a little bit sooner. Bye.